The alarm rang through the command center at exactly 3 in the morning. Admiral Kyle Harrison woke up instantly, his years of military training kicking in before his mind fully cleared. He grabbed his uniform and dressed quickly, knowing that middle-of-the-night alarms meant serious trouble. By the time he reached the Orbital Defense Station's main operations room, a dozen officers were already there, their faces lit by the glow of computer screens. Commander Linda Martinez stood at the center display, her hands moving across the holographic controls. She looked up as Kyle entered, and he could see the worry in her eyes. That alone told him everything he needed to know. Linda had served in 3 major conflicts and never showed fear. If she was worried, the situation was bad. "Show me," Kyle said, walking to stand beside her. Linda pulled up the sensor data, and the main screen filled with red dots, hundreds of them, clustered near the neutral zone between human and Krell space. Each dot represented an enemy warship. Kyle counted quickly in his head and felt his stomach drop. Over 300 vessels, the largest Krell fleet ever assembled. "When did they gather?" Kyle asked. "Our deep space drones picked up the first movement 6 hours ago," Linda explained. "They've been jumping in steadily since then. Intelligence analysis suggests they're preparing for a major offensive." Kyle studied the formation. The Krell ships were arranged in a classic attack pattern, with heavy battleships at the center and faster cruisers on the wings. Their target was obvious: New Haven, the human colony world that lay just 2 days' travel from their current position. 4 million people lived on New Haven, men, women, and children who had left Earth to build new lives among the stars. "Can we evacuate New Haven in time?" Kyle asked, though he already knew the answer. Linda shook her head. "Not possible, sir. We'd need at least a week to move 4 million people, and that's assuming we had enough transport ships, which we don't. The Krell could strike within 48 hours. Kyle felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders. 4 million lives depending on decisions he would make in the next few hours. He looked around the operations room at the other officers. They were all watching him, waiting for orders, waiting for him to find a solution to an impossible problem. Captain Derek Sullivan entered the room, still adjusting his jacket. Derek commanded the battleship Valor, one of the most powerful ships in the human fleet. He was younger than Kyle, only 35, but he had proven himself in combat many times. Derek walked straight to the display and whistled low when he saw the enemy numbers. "That's a lot of red," Derek said quietly. "Too many," another officer muttered from across the room. Kyle turned to face his command staff. "Get me everything we have. Every ship, every analysis, every scrap of intelligence on Krell tactics. I want options on my desk in 2 hours." The room erupted into activity. Officers rushed to their stations, fingers flying across keyboards, voices calling out data and confirmations. Kyle moved to his private office adjoining the operations room and sat down heavily in his chair. 300 Krell warships. The human fleet had maybe 80 combat-ready vessels in this sector, and most of those were scattered across a dozen different patrol routes. A soft knock came at his door. "Come in," Kyle called. Linda entered carrying a datapad. "I thought you should see this immediately, sir. It's from Lieutenant Amy Peterson in Tactical Analysis." Kyle took the pad and began reading. Amy was the youngest officer on his staff, just 26 years old, but she had a brilliant mind for strategy. Her report outlined something that made Kyle sit up straight. She had been studying the new jump drive technology that Earth's engineers had developed over the past year. The drives could move ships across vast distances almost instantly, cutting journey times from weeks to minutes. But Amy's report went further. She had run combat simulations using the jump drives in an offensive capacity. Her models showed that a fleet using coordinated jump attacks could achieve total surprise against an enemy. The numbers were shocking. In simulation after simulation, the attacking force won with minimal casualties as long as they struck before the enemy could raise defenses. Kyle read the report 3 times, his mind racing. It was dangerous. It was risky. It violated every conventional doctrine about naval warfare, but it might be the only chance New Haven had. He called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. Within 30 minutes, they were all gathered around the conference table. Derek, Linda, and 8 other senior officers. Kyle activated the room's security protocols, ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard or recorded. "I'm going to propose something that many of you will think is insane," Kyle began. "But before you object, I want you to hear me out completely." He explained Amy's analysis and her simulation results. He outlined a plan to take the human fleet directly to the Krell position using the jump drives. They would materialize in the middle of the enemy formation and open fire immediately, hitting the Krell before they could react. The room was silent when he finished. Derek spoke first. "It's never been done before," he said slowly, "coordinating 70 or 80 ships in a simultaneous jump. If even one ship arrives off target, they could collide with friendlies or emerge in the middle of an enemy vessel." "I know the risks," Kyle said, "but consider the alternative. If we wait for the Krell to attack New Haven, millions will die. Our fleet isn't strong enough to defend the planet in conventional battle." "This gives us a chance," Linda leaned forward. "I've studied Krell doctrine for 5 years. Their weakness is response time. Their command ships need several minutes to bring weapons and shields online from standby mode. If we hit them during that window, we could devastate their fleet before they fire a shot." Another officer, Commander Greg Mitchell, spoke up. He was the fleet's chief engineer. "The jump drive technology is solid, sir. We've tested it extensively. The coordination software can link all our ships together for simultaneous arrival. It's risky, but technically possible." The debate continued for an hour. Officers raised concerns, suggested modifications, and argued over details. But slowly a consensus formed. The plan was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also their best option. Their only real option. Kyle made his decision. "We go. I want all available combat vessels recalled immediately. Captains are to be briefed on the mission parameters. We launch in 36 hours. As the meeting broke up and officers hurried to their duties, Derek stayed behind. He walked over to where Kyle stood, looking out the window at the stars beyond. "You know this could end very badly," Derek said quietly. "I know," Kyle replied, "but doing nothing guarantees disaster. At least this way we're taking control of our fate." Derek nodded. "Then let's make sure we do it right. I'll personally oversee the jump drive coordination. We won't lose ships to technical failure." Over the next 36 hours, the human fleet assembled in secret. Warships jumped in from patrol routes across human space. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers all converged on a staging area far from enemy sensors. Captains received their orders and studied their assigned targets. Engineers worked around the clock, checking and rechecking every system. Lieutenant Amy Peterson barely slept, running simulation after simulation, refining the attack plan, calculating firing solutions and approach vectors. Her work would guide every ship in the fleet when the moment of battle arrived. In crew quarters throughout the fleet, soldiers and sailors prepared for combat. They checked weapons, wrote letters home, and tried not to think too hard about the odds they faced. Everyone knew the mission was dangerous. Everyone understood that some ships might not return. Kyle stood in the operations center as the final countdown began. 75 warships were ready. 12,000 men and women preparing to jump into battle. He thought about New Haven, about the families sleeping peacefully, unaware of the enemy fleet bearing down on them. This was why he had joined the military 30 years ago. To protect people. To stand between civilians and those who would harm them. "All ships report ready, sir," Linda announced. Kyle took a deep breath. "Send the order. Execute Operation Hammer." Throughout the fleet, jump drives activated. Reality bent and twisted as 75 warships vanished from normal space, beginning their journey to the battle that would change everything. The bridge of the battleship Valor hummed with quiet activity as Captain Derek Sullivan reviewed the final system checks. Every screen showed green indicators. Every station reported ready status. His crew had worked without rest for the past day, preparing the ship for the most dangerous mission any of them had ever faced. Derek walked slowly between the control stations, observing his people at work. They were professionals, each one handpicked for their skill and reliability. "Jump drive status?" Derek asked his chief engineer. Commander Greg Mitchell looked up from his console, his fingers still dancing across the controls. "All systems optimal, Captain. Drive is charged and holding steady. Synchronization with the fleet network is locked at .998. We're as ready as we'll ever be." Derek nodded. The synchronization number was crucial. Every ship in the fleet had to arrive at exactly the same moment. Even a difference of 1 second could throw off the entire attack plan. The computers controlling the jump drives were linked together, sharing timing data across quantum channels that couldn't be intercepted or jammed. It was new technology, barely tested outside of controlled experiments. Now they were betting everything on it working perfectly. On the far side of the bridge, Lieutenant Amy Peterson sat at the tactical station, her young face intense with concentration. She had 3 screens active in front of her, each showing different aspects of the battle plan. Firing sequences, target assignments, damage projections. Amy had created this plan, and now she would help execute it. Derek knew she hadn't slept in over 30 hours, but her hands were steady and her eyes were clear. "How are the numbers looking, Lieutenant?" Derek asked, moving to stand behind her station. Amy pulled up a final simulation. "If we maintain surprise for the first 5 minutes, our projected success rate is 94%. Enemy casualties should be catastrophic. Our loss is minimal. Everything depends on that initial shock. And if they detect us before we're ready?" Amy's expression darkened. "Then the simulation shows 60% casualties on our side. It becomes a slugging match and they have the numbers advantage." Derek put a hand on her shoulder. "Then we make sure they don't detect us." "Your plan is sound, Amy. Trust it." Throughout the fleet, similar conversations were happening on 74 other ships. Captains reassuring crews, engineers triple-checking systems, tactical officers reviewing their assigned targets. 12,000 people preparing to jump into the unknown. On the command ship Liberty, Commander Linda Martinez sat in the Fleet Operations Center, surrounded by communication equipment. Her role was critical. She would coordinate targeting between all ships, making sure that firepower was distributed efficiently and no enemy vessel was left untouched. In front of her, a massive holographic display showed the position of every friendly ship and every known enemy contact. Linda had served with Admiral Kyle Harrison for 8 years. She trusted his judgment completely, but even she felt nervous about this mission. They were about to attempt something that had never been done in the history of space warfare. A coordinated jump assault by 75 warships appearing in the middle of an enemy fleet, striking without warning. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. Her communication panel lit up with incoming messages from ship captains across the fleet, each one confirming readiness, reporting their final status. Linda logged each report, her practiced hands moving efficiently across the controls. She had been a communications officer for 15 years, working her way up from a junior technician to her current position as Fleet Communications Director. She had never commanded a ship in battle, but she had coordinated dozens of fleet actions. This would be her greatest challenge. On the carrier Destiny, Pilot Officer Jack Murphy strapped himself into his fighter's cockpit. Around him in the launch bay, 49 other pilots were doing the same. The fighters would launch the instant the carrier emerged from jump space. Their job was to provide close support, hitting enemy escorts and defending the larger human warships from Krell attack craft. Jack was 29 years old and had been flying fighters for 6 years. He loved the freedom of space combat, the way his fighter responded to the slightest touch, the rush of adrenaline when missiles launched and energy weapons fired. But he had never been in a battle like the one they were about to face. 300 enemy ships, the largest fleet engagement in human history. His wingman, Lieutenant Chris Palmer, came over the radio. "You ready for this, Jack?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Jack replied, running through his pre-flight checklist. "Just stick close when we launch. It's going to be chaos out there." "Always do," Chris said. Jack could hear the tension in his friend's voice. Everyone was scared. Anyone with sense would be scared. The trick was to not let the fear control you. Back on Earth, in the Defense Council's war room deep beneath Geneva, civilian analyst Karen Foster watched the mission preparations unfold on secure video feeds. Karen wasn't military. She was a researcher who specialized in alien cultures and combat doctrines. For 3 years, she had studied everything humanity knew about the Krell Dominion. Their history, their tactics, their weaknesses. It was Karen who had first identified the Krell's slow response times. Their command ships were powerful, but they operated on standby mode during fleet movements to conserve power. Bringing all systems online took time, 7 minutes from standby to full combat readiness. In a normal battle, that delay didn't matter. Fleets saw each other coming from millions of kilometers away. There was plenty of time to prepare, but this wouldn't be a normal battle. The human fleet would appear at close range, already firing. Those 7 minutes would be an eternity. The Krell would be helpless, unable to defend themselves as human weapons tore through their formations. Karen's analysis had been crucial to the battle plan. Admiral Harrison had read her reports and built his entire strategy around that 7-minute window. Now she could only watch and hope that her research was correct. If she had made a mistake, if the Krell response time was faster than she calculated, the human fleet would be destroyed. On the Liberty, Admiral Kyle Harrison stood in the command center, watching the countdown timer. 20 minutes until jump. He had already given his orders. The fleet knew what to do. Now it was a matter of execution. Kyle thought about his wife Helen back on Earth. He had sent her a message before the fleet departed, though he couldn't tell her where he was going or what he was about to do. Military security prohibited that. He had simply told her he loved her and would see her soon. Kyle was 53 years old. He had spent his entire adult life in the military, working his way up from a junior officer on a patrol cruiser to admiral of the fleet. He had fought in border skirmishes, defended colonies from pirate raids, and negotiated treaties with alien powers. But he had never commanded anything like this. A preemptive strike against a superior enemy force, an all-or-nothing gamble to save millions of lives. The countdown reached 10 minutes. Throughout the fleet, final preparations were complete. Weapons were charged and ready. Shields were on standby, ready to activate the instant they emerged from jump space. Targeting computers had been fed the locations of enemy vessels, calculated from the most recent drone reconnaissance data. On the Valor, Derek Sullivan addressed his crew over the ship's intercom. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had faced death before and wasn't afraid. All hands, this is the captain. In 9 minutes, we will jump into battle. Our mission is to protect New Haven and its people from an enemy that wants to destroy them. We will achieve surprise. We will strike hard and fast. We will show the Krell what happens when they threaten humanity. I am proud to serve with each and every one of you. Now let's go make history. Throughout the ship, crew members heard those words and felt their resolve strengthen. They were scared, yes, but they were also ready. Ready to fight for something bigger than themselves. Amy Peterson made final adjustments to her tactical program, ensuring that every targeting solution was perfect. Greg Mitchell monitored the jump drive, watching the power levels climb as the countdown continued. On other ships, other crews were doing the same. Preparing, checking, waiting. Linda Martinez opened the fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is fleet operations. Jump in 5 minutes. Maintain radio silence after emergence until Admiral's command. Execute your assigned firing sequences immediately upon arrival. Stay sharp and stay focused. Operation Hammer is go. Acknowledgement signals came back from all 75 ships. Green lights across Linda's board. Everyone was ready. Jack Murphy took a deep breath in his fighter's cockpit. 4 minutes now. His hands gripped the control stick, feeling the familiar texture. He had flown this fighter through countless training exercises. He knew every system, every capability. Now he would put that knowledge to the ultimate test. On Earth, Karen Foster leaned forward in her chair, watching the timer count down. She had done everything she could. Her analysis was complete, her recommendations made. Now other people would risk their lives based on her work. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing. 3 minutes. Throughout the fleet, hearts beat faster. Breathing became more controlled. This was it. The point of no commitment. In 3 minutes. The transition from jump space back to normal reality was instantaneous and violent. One moment there was nothing but the strange, twisted dimension between stars, and the next moment the human fleet materialized in perfect formation, spread across 8,000 kilometers of space in the heart of the Krell battle group. On the Valor, Derek Sullivan felt his stomach lurch as the ship emerged. His eyes went immediately to the main display, and what he saw was exactly what they had planned for. Krell warships hung in space all around them. Massive vessels painted in dark colors that absorbed light. They were arranged in neat formations, their crews relaxed, their weapons cold and inactive. The enemy had no idea what was about to happen. "All weapons fire," Derek shouted, and his crew responded instantly. The Valor's main railgun batteries opened up, each gun launching tungsten projectiles at incredible velocity. The physics were simple and devastating. Mass times acceleration equals force. The projectiles, each weighing several tons, were accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. When they hit enemy ships, they punched straight through armor like it wasn't even there. Derek watched as 3 Krell cruisers exploded in the first 5 seconds. The projectiles tore through their hulls, rupturing fuel systems and ammunition storage. Brilliant fireballs expanded in the vacuum of space, debris spinning away in all directions. The enemy ships never had a chance to fire back. Their crews were probably still trying to figure out what was happening when they died. All across the battlefield, the same scene repeated itself. 75 human warships all firing at once, all hitting surprised and unprepared targets. It was devastation on a scale rarely seen in space combat. The Krell had been caught completely off guard. On the Liberty, Commander Linda Martinez coordinated the targeting solutions, her fingers flying across her controls. She watched as red icons on her display began blinking out, each one representing a destroyed enemy vessel. Her headset filled with confirmation signals from various ships across the fleet. Valor confirms 3 kills, Destiny launching fighters, Independence engaging enemy carriers, Thunder reports direct hits on command ship Alpha. Linda processed the information instantly, updating targeting priorities and sending new orders to ships across the fleet. Her job was to make sure that firepower was distributed efficiently. No wasted shots on already dead targets, no enemy ships left untouched. The Krell fleet was massive, over 300 warships, but they were scattered across a huge area of space and completely unprepared for combat. The human ships, though fewer in number, had materialized in optimal firing positions and were operating with perfect coordination. Every shot was planned. Every attack was calculated. Lieutenant Amy Peterson watched her tactical display on the Valor with fierce satisfaction mixed with horror. The numbers matched her simulations almost perfectly. Enemy casualties were climbing rapidly. But these weren't just numbers on a screen. Each destroyed ship represented hundreds or thousands of lives ending. Krell lives, yes, members of a species that had come to destroy human colonies, but lives nonetheless. She pushed the thought aside. There would be time for reflection later. Now she had a job to do. Amy updated firing solutions as enemy ships tried to maneuver, calculating trajectories and relative velocities in her head faster than most computers could manage. Her recommendations went out to weapons officers across the fleet, helping them make every shot count. On the carrier Destiny, Jack Murphy's fighter launched from the bay at maximum acceleration. Around him, 49 other fighters did the same, creating a swarm of small, fast attack craft. Jack's targeting computer immediately lit up with enemy contacts. Krell escort frigates, smaller ships designed to protect the larger vessels from exactly this kind of attack. Flight leader to all wings, engage escorts first. Don't let them get organized, Jack transmitted, and his squadron responded. The fighters split into smaller groups, each taking a different target. Jack led his wing of 6 fighters toward a Krell frigate that was trying to power up its weapons. He could see the enemy ship's systems starting to come online, energy readings climbing on his sensors. But they were too slow. Far too slow. Missiles away, Jack called, and 6 missiles launched from his fighter's pylons. His wingmen did the same, and 36 missiles converged on the Krell frigate from multiple angles. The enemy ship's point defense systems tried to activate, but only managed to shoot down a few missiles before the rest hit home. The frigate came apart in a ball of fire and shattered metal. Target destroyed. Moving to next contact, Jack reported, already swinging his fighter toward another enemy vessel. Back on the Liberty, Admiral Kyle Harrison stood at the center of the command deck, watching the battle unfold. His experienced eye took in every detail of the tactical display. The Krell fleet was in chaos. Some ships were trying to power up weapons and shields. Others were attempting to flee. A few were trying to return fire, but their shots were wild and uncoordinated, missing the fast-moving human ships by wide margins. Status report, Kyle ordered. Linda looked up from her station. 217 enemy vessels destroyed, 34 attempting to flee. The remaining ships are starting to mount some resistance, but it's disorganized. Our casualties so far are minimal, sir. 3 frigates with moderate damage. No ships lost, Kyle nodded. The plan was working even better than they had hoped. But he knew better than to get overconfident. The Krell were a warrior species with centuries of combat experience. Once they recovered from the initial shock, they would fight back hard. Order all ships to press the attack. Don't give them time to organize. Target fleeing vessels next. We can't let anyone escape to report our capabilities. Linda transmitted the orders and the human fleet adjusted its targeting priorities. Fast destroyers broke formation to pursue fleeing Krell ships, their engines burning hot as they chased down the enemy. On the Valor, Derek watched as a Krell battleship finally managed to bring its weapons online. Energy beams lanced out, striking a human cruiser. The cruiser's shields absorbed most of the impact, but Derek could see damage reports coming in. The enemy was starting to fight back. "Target that battleship with everything we have," Derek ordered. "I want it dead before it can fire again." The Valor's weapons officers complied, and a massive barrage of railgun fire and missiles flew toward the Krell battleship. The enemy ship's shields were only at partial strength, not yet fully charged. The human attack overwhelmed them easily. Projectiles smashed through the shield barrier and tore into the battleship's hull. Secondary explosions rippled across the enemy vessel as its ammunition stores cooked off. Within 30 seconds, the battleship was a drifting hulk, atmosphere venting from dozens of breaches. Greg Mitchell monitored the Valor's systems from his engineering station. The ship was performing perfectly. Weapons were firing at maximum rate without overheating. Shields were holding strong. The jump drive had worked flawlessly, placing them exactly where they needed to be. All the hours of preparation and maintenance were paying off. "Captain, I'm detecting an energy spike from that Krell carrier to our port side," Greg called out. "They're trying to launch attack craft." Derek turned to look at the sensor reading. The Krell carrier was one of the largest ships in the enemy fleet, capable of carrying hundreds of fighters. If it managed to launch its full complement, those fighters could swarm the human ships and cause serious damage. "Amy, solution to that carrier now," Derek ordered. Amy's fingers danced across her controls, transmitting to weapons, firing in 3, 2, 1. The Valor's forward missile batteries launched a full spread, 20 missiles screaming through space toward the Krell carrier. At the same time, 3 other human ships added their own firepower to the attack. The carrier tried to maneuver, but it was huge and slow. The missiles struck along its launch bays, destroying fighters before they could deploy and triggering massive explosions deep inside the ship. The carrier began to break apart, its structural integrity compromised by the internal explosions. Derek watched as the massive vessel split into 3 large pieces, each piece tumbling away, trailing debris and frozen atmosphere. Jack Murphy and his fighter wing had moved on to engaging another group of Krell escorts. These enemies had managed to get their weapons online and were putting up a real fight. Energy beams crisscrossed space around Jack's fighter as he jinked and weaved, avoiding incoming fire by fractions of a second. "Chris, on my wing." "We're going in close," Jack transmitted to his wingman. The 2 fighters dove toward a Krell escort that was targeting human destroyers. Jack's targeting computer struggled to maintain lock, as both his fighter and the enemy ship maneuvered violently. Finally, the tone sounded in his helmet indicating weapons lock. Jack pressed the firing stud and his fighter's main gun sent a stream of high-velocity rounds toward the Krell ship. The rounds stitched across the escort's hull, chewing through armor and finding vulnerable systems underneath. The enemy ship shuddered and began to list as its maneuvering thrusters failed. "Nice shooting," Chris called. "Target disabled." "Finish it," Jack ordered, and Chris launched a single missile that ended the escort's struggle. The battle had been raging for 8 minutes now. What remained of the Krell fleet was in complete disarray. The clock showed 8 minutes since the first shot was fired. Admiral Kyle Harrison stood in the command center of the Liberty, his eyes scanning the tactical display with the practiced gaze of a veteran officer. The numbers told a story that was both impressive and terrible. 217 Krell vessels destroyed outright, 34 more attempting to flee into deep space. Only a handful showing any signs of organized resistance. Kyle's display updated continuously as new information came in from sensor arrays across the fleet. Each update brought more evidence of the overwhelming success of Operation Hammer. The human fleet had achieved something that military historians would study for generations to come. They had turned a numerically superior force into scattered wreckage in less than 10 minutes. "Sir, we're tracking fleeing vessels heading on multiple vectors," Commander Linda Martinez reported from her station. "They're breaking off in different directions, trying to make it difficult for us to pursue all of them." Kyle considered the tactical situation. The fleeing Krell ships represented a problem. If even one escaped to report what happened here, the enemy would learn about humanity's new jump drive technology and combat doctrine. Future battles would be much harder as the Krell adapted their tactics. Oh, there could be no survivors from this engagement, not yet. Not until humanity was ready to reveal its new capabilities. Signal Captain Sullivan on the Valor. Have him take his battle group and pursue the fleeing vessels on Vector Alpha. Captain Rodriguez on the Independence can take Vector Beta. I want every enemy ship accounted for. Linda transmitted the orders. and Kyle watched as elements of the fleet broke off from the main battle to chase down the escaping Krell. The human destroyers were faster than most Krell vessels, and the jump drives gave them an enormous advantage in tactical mobility. The fleeing enemy ships wouldn't get far. On the Valor, Derek Sullivan received his orders and immediately began coordinating his assigned ships. 5 destroyers, 2 cruisers, and his battleship formed up in pursuit formation. Their targets were a group of 12 Krell ships that were accelerating away from the battle at maximum speed. Helm, pursue those vessels. Weapons, as soon as we're in range, I want precise fire. No wasted shots, Derek ordered. His crew responded with practiced efficiency. The Valor surged forward, its powerful engines pushing the massive battleship to speeds that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Human engine technology had advanced significantly in recent years, another advantage over the Krell. Greg Mitchell monitored the engine systems carefully. The Valor was pushing close to maximum capacity, but everything was holding steady. Temperature readings were high but within acceptable ranges. Power distribution was optimal. The ship could maintain this speed for hours if necessary. Engineering reports all systems nominal, Captain. We can maintain pursuit indefinitely, Greg called out. Derek nodded. He watched the sensor display as the distance to the fleeing Krell ship slowly decreased. The enemy was fast but not fast enough. In 5 minutes they would be within effective weapons range. In 10 minutes this chase would be over. Throughout the main battle area, the remaining Krell ships that had chosen to fight rather than flee were discovering just how outmatched they were. The human fleet had trained extensively with their new weapon systems and coordinated tactics. Every ship knew exactly what to do, and they executed their roles with precision. Lieutenant Amy Peterson continued feeding targeting data to the Valor's weapon systems, even as the battleship pursued the fleeing enemy. Her tactical computer tracked dozens of contacts simultaneously, calculating firing solutions and predicting enemy movements. It was exhausting work that required total concentration, but Amy had trained for this. She was doing exactly what she was meant to do. On the carrier Destiny, Jack Murphy's fighter squadron had shifted to a new role. With most of the Krell escorts destroyed, the fighters were now hunting down damaged enemy vessels and escape pods. It was grim work but necessary. Jack understood the logic even if he didn't like it. This battle had to remain secret for now. That meant no survivors who could carry word back to Krell space. Flight leader to all wings, maintain pattern search. Check every piece of debris large enough to hide a life pod. Use sensors at maximum range, Jack transmitted. His fighters spread out in a search pattern, their powerful sensor arrays scanning the battlefield. Space was vast and filled with debris from the destroyed ships. Finding small escape pods in all that wreckage was like searching for needles in a haystack. But it was necessary work. Jack's wingman, Chris, called out a contact. I've got a cluster of pods at bearing 270, range 40,000 kilometers. Looks like about 20 pods from a Krell battleship. Confirmed. Move to intercept, Jack responded, turning his fighter toward the new heading. The escape pods showed up clearly on his sensors as he approached. Small metallic spheres, each containing a handful of Krell survivors. Jack felt a twist in his stomach. These were defeated enemies, helpless and at his mercy. But orders were orders, and the mission came first. He locked weapons on the first pod and fired. The pod disintegrated under the impact of his fighter's guns. He moved to the next one, then the next. It took less than 2 minutes to destroy all 20 pods. Jack felt sick as he flew away from the debris. This was the ugly side of war that nobody talked about. Back on the Liberty, Admiral Kyle received reports from across the fleet. The main battle was essentially over. The last few Krell ships that were still fighting had been overwhelmed. Now it was just a matter of cleanup operations, hunting down the fleeing vessels and making sure no one escaped. Casualties? Kyle asked Linda. She pulled up the reports. 7 ships with damage of varying severity. 3 frigates took heavy hits and will need dockyard repairs. The cruiser Defiance lost its main gun but is otherwise operational. No ships destroyed, sir. Personnel casualties are 43 wounded, 0 killed. Kyle let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. 0 killed. In a battle against a force that had outnumbered them 4-1, they had lost no one. It seemed almost impossible, but the numbers didn't lie. The surprise attack had been so devastating that the Krell never had a real chance to fight back effectively. Make sure all wounded personnel receive immediate medical attention. Commendations for the medical teams for their quick response, Kyle said. On the Valor, the pursuit of the fleeing Krell ships was reaching its conclusion. Derek's battle group had closed to weapons range, and the destroyers were already engaging the rear of the enemy formation. Railgun fire reached across the distance and Krell ships began to die. Derek watched as enemy vessels tried desperately to escape. Some attempted to fight back, turning to fire at their pursuers, but their weapons were outranged by the human ships and their attacks fell short. Others tried evasive maneuvers, but there was nowhere to hide in the empty void of space. "Target the lead ship with full battery," Derek ordered. "Let's end this quickly." The Valor's main guns spoke and a concentrated barrage of projectiles smashed into a Krell heavy cruiser. The enemy ship's shields, already weakened from the earlier battle, collapsed completely. The projectiles tore through the hull and the cruiser exploded in a brilliant flash. One by one, the fleeing Krell ships were hunted down and destroyed. The human destroyers were relentless, pursuing their targets across thousands of kilometers. Some Krell ships tried to surrender, transmitting desperate pleas for mercy. But Derek had his orders. No survivors, no witnesses. He felt a weight on his conscience with each kill, but he pushed the feeling aside. The mission came first. 15 minutes into the battle, Commander Linda Martinez updated her casualty board. 300 Krell vessels destroyed, 0 Krell vessels remaining. The enemy fleet had been completely annihilated. It was the most one-sided naval engagement in the history of space warfare. "All vessels report enemy contacts eliminated, sir," Linda informed Kyle. Kyle nodded slowly. It was done. They had achieved their objective and more. The Krell threat to New Haven had been eliminated. But looking at the tactical display, seeing the vast field of debris that represented thousands of destroyed ships and tens of thousands of dead Krell warriors, Kyle felt no sense of triumph. Only a deep weariness. War was sometimes necessary, but it was never something to celebrate. The Krell had been ruthless enemies who had conquered other species and enslaved entire worlds. They had come to New Haven with the intention of killing or enslaving 4 million human colonists. They had deserved to be stopped. But the sheer scale of destruction still weighed heavily on Kyle's mind. "Begin recovery operations," Kyle ordered. "I want search teams looking for Krell survivors. We'll take prisoners now that the battle is over." Throughout the fleet, the mood was a strange mixture of relief, exhaustion, and disbelief. Crew members who had been sure they were flying to their deaths realized they had survived. The battle they had all feared had turned into a complete victory. But there was little celebration. Everyone was too tired, too shocked by what they had just witnessed. On the Valor, Derek Sullivan sat in his command chair and closed his eyes for a moment. His ship had performed perfectly. His crew had done everything asked of them and more. They had won a great victory. So why did he feel so hollow inside? 14 minutes had passed since the first shot was fired. Now the battlefield was silent except for the quiet hum of human ships moving through the debris field. What had been the largest Krell fleet ever assembled was now nothing but scattered wreckage, broken hulls, and the frozen bodies of warriors who would never see their homes again. Admiral Kyle Harrison stood at the window of the Liberty's observation deck, looking out at the aftermath of the battle. Pieces of destroyed ships drifted past, some still glowing red-hot from the violence that had torn them apart. In the distance, he could see the silhouettes of human warships moving slowly through the wreckage, their searchlights cutting through the darkness as recovery teams looked for survivors. Behind Kyle, Commander Linda Martinez approached quietly, carrying a datapad with the final casualty reports. She waited for Kyle to acknowledge her presence before speaking. "Final numbers, sir," Linda said softly. "Enemy casualties are estimated at 98,000 personnel. We recovered 1,943 survivors. On our side, 7 ships sustained damage, with the 3 frigates requiring major repairs. Personnel casualties remain at 43 wounded, 0 killed." Kyle took the datapad and read through the report carefully. 98,000 dead. The number was staggering. He had known the battle would be brutal, but seeing the final count written out made it real in a way that watching the tactical display hadn't. "Make sure the wounded receive the best care possible, both ours and theirs," Kyle said. "The Krell prisoners are to be treated with respect and dignity. They fought for what they believed in just as we did." Linda nodded. "Already ordered, sir. Medical teams are working around the clock. The Krell wounded are receiving the same treatment as our own people." On the battleship Valor, Captain Derek Sullivan walked through the ship's corridors, checking on his crew. The battle had lasted less than 15 minutes, but those minutes had been among the most intense of Derek's life. Now that the adrenaline was fading, exhaustion was setting in. He could see it in the faces of his crew as well. Derek stopped by the medical bay, where several crew members were being treated for minor injuries. Nothing serious, just the kind of bumps and bruises that happened when a ship maneuvered violently during combat. The ship's doctor, Lieutenant Karen Foster, was moving between patients with practiced efficiency. "How are they doing, Doctor?" Derek asked. Karen looked up from the crew member she was treating. "All minor injuries, Captain. Everyone will make a full recovery. We were very lucky today." Derek nodded. Lucky was the right word. They had gone into battle against a vastly superior force and emerged almost unscathed. But Derek knew it wasn't just luck. It was planning, training, and the courage of every person in the fleet. In the Carrier Destiny's pilot ready room, Jack Murphy sat with his squadron, debriefing the mission. The other pilots were excited, talking rapidly about the battle, reliving their combat experiences. But Jack was quiet, his mind still processing what he had done. Commander Lisa Parker noticed Jack's silence. After the debriefing ended and the other pilots left, she sat down next to him. "Want to talk about it?" Lisa asked. Jack was quiet for a long moment. "I destroyed 20 escape pods today. 20 pods full of people who couldn't fight back. I know they were the enemy. I know it was necessary. But that doesn't make it easier." Lisa nodded. "It's not supposed to be easy, Jack. The day killing becomes easy is the day we lose our humanity. You did your duty. You protected New Haven and its 4 million people. Sometimes that means making hard choices. How do you live with it?" Jack asked. "You remember why you did it," Lisa replied. "You remember the people you saved. The children on New Haven who will grow up because of what we did today. That doesn't erase what we had to do, but it gives it meaning." Back on Earth, in the Defense Council's war room beneath Geneva, civilian analyst Karen Foster received the battle reports with a mixture of relief and horror. Her analysis had been correct. The Krell response time had been exactly as she predicted, but seeing the casualty numbers, understanding that her work had led to the deaths of nearly 100,000 beings, weighed heavily on her conscience. Karen's supervisor, Director Paul Crane, found her staring at her computer screen, tears running down her face. "You saved 4 million lives today, Karen," Paul said gently. "The Krell were coming to destroy New Haven. Nothing would have stopped them except what our fleet did." "I know," Karen whispered. "But knowing it was necessary doesn't make it hurt less." Paul put a hand on her shoulder. "That's what makes you a good person. Don't ever lose that capacity for empathy, but don't let it stop you from doing your job either. The universe is a dangerous place and humanity needs people like you to help us survive." Throughout the human fleet, similar conversations were happening. Crew members were processing what they had witnessed and what they had done. Some felt pride in their victory. Others felt guilt over the destruction they had caused. Most felt a complicated mixture of both emotions. Lieutenant Amy Peterson sat in her quarters on the Valor, writing a detailed analysis of the battle for the military archives. Her tactical simulations had proven remarkably accurate, but the reality of combat had taught her things that no simulation could capture. The chaos, the fear, the weight of responsibility when lives depended on your decisions. Amy made notes about everything she had observed. The effectiveness of the jump drive in combat, the importance of surprise and coordination, the psychological impact of overwhelming firepower. Her report would help shape future human military doctrine for decades to come. On the Liberty, Admiral Kyle Harrison prepared to address the fleet. Every ship would receive his message simultaneously. He had spent an hour writing and rewriting his words, trying to find the right balance between honoring the victory and acknowledging its cost. The communication officers set up the recording equipment, and Kyle stood before the camera. When the red light came on, he began to speak. "To all personnel of Battle Group Hammer, this is Admiral Harrison. Today, we achieved a victory that will be remembered throughout human history. We faced an enemy that outnumbered us 4-1, and we defeated them completely. Not a single enemy vessel escaped. Not a single human life was lost. You should all be proud of what we accomplished." Kyle paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I want us to remember something important. War is not a game. The Krell warriors we fought today were living beings with families and homes just like us. They fought for their empire just as we fight for our people. Their deaths, while necessary to protect New Haven, are not something to celebrate. We honor them by remembering that they were brave warriors who died doing their duty. We also must remember why we fight. 4 million people on New Haven will wake up tomorrow safe and alive because of what we did today. Children will grow up. Families will stay together. That is why we serve. That is why we risk our lives. To protect those who cannot protect themselves. In the days ahead, we will return to Earth. There will be ceremonies and medals and public recognition. Accept the honors you receive because you earned them. But never forget the cost of victory. Never forget that freedom and safety are purchased with blood and sacrifice. I am honored to serve with each and every one of you. You are the finest crew I have ever commanded. Now let's bring our ships home. The recording ended and Kyle felt emotionally drained. He had commanded in combat before, but never anything like this. Never a battle that would reshape the strategic balance of power in this region of space. Over the next several hours, the human fleet completed its recovery operations and began preparations for the journey home. The damaged ships were assisted by their sister vessels. The Krell prisoners were secured in holding areas and given food and water. The dead, both human and Krell, were treated with respect. On New Haven, the colonists had no idea how close they had come to destruction. They went about their daily lives, working, studying, playing, completely unaware that an enemy fleet had been preparing to attack them. The planetary government had been notified of the threat and the subsequent battle, but they decided to keep the information classified for now. No point in causing panic over a danger that had already been eliminated. In the days that followed, word of the victory began to spread through human space. At first, it was just rumors and classified reports. But slowly, carefully, the government released information to the public. Humanity had won a great victory against the Krell Dominion. A fleet that threatened millions of lives had been destroyed. The reaction was intense. Some people celebrated, seeing the victory as proof of human superiority. Others worried about retaliation from the Krell. Political leaders debated what the victory meant for human foreign policy. Should they press their advantage or seek peace negotiations? But among the military personnel who had fought in the battle, the mood was more subdued. They had done their duty and done it well. They had saved lives and protected the innocent. But they had also killed tens of thousands of beings and witnessed destruction on a massive scale. Those experiences would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Captain Derek Sullivan returned to Earth and was immediately promoted to Rear Admiral for his leadership during the battle.